So thank you everybody for coming to the last session. Thank you for everyone online for logging in. I'll be back in position to look at chat in just 1 second, but I'm here to introduce our last talk of the day, which is by Sefryn Penrose. She's co-director of ButCH, an independent queer identified arts and heritage consultancy. She has a background in archaeology with a 20-year career in heritage, from planning and infrastructure to policy, CPD, community and academic work. And ButCH is the evaluator for QHCN. So Sefryn today will talk about the evaluation process, how it's often thought of as a tick box exercise, but there's actually a lot more behind it. And she'll talk us through the process, some pitfalls, and what we can learn from the evaluation process itself.
Thank you.
Hope that's a fair presentation.
Yeah, great, thanks.
And
yeah, I've got a clicky thing. Yeah, so that's my introduction done. But just all of that bit that says who I am is partly to say that I've got a lot of hats in the heritage business. And obviously, if I've been doing it for 20 years, then I've been at it since I was 5 years old. But a lot of the work I've done is actually around strategy and policy in a lot of different areas, but particularly in how projects are run by organisations. And I see evaluation as a bit of an extension of that. So it is a kind of organisational exploration. And in being so, you can get a lot out of it or you can get nothing out of it. And I think it can sometimes be seen as, and possibly sometimes be, a real kind of another industry thing, a bit of chuntering that we have to go through. And it's often something that we peg on at the last minute when it would have been really helpful to have it at the first minute. So that, do I have to like wave it magically there? That's what I saw you doing earlier. Yes, magic. This was for the Cornish folk, but they've gone, but maybe they'll see it later. I don't know if you know, but there's a Cornish saint, the patron saint of evaluation. So Saint Eval. This is actually a really lovely parish in North Cornwall, and that is a joke, but also this is a really lovely archive set up by the playwright Jane Dark. And in terms of archives in place and online, I'm just putting it out there. Yes, Saint Eval. But it's also there to just kind of highlight that any form of doing, knowledge making, puts things on the map, and mapping is always a power process. So it's just, I'm just putting it straight up at the front of this presentation just to remind us all that whatever we do, we need to do with great care because of the power aspects involved. And we've heard a lot of that over the last 2 days. This is the catchy title of the funding tranche that it's my pleasure to be appointed to do the evaluation for. So it's part of a National Lottery Heritage Fund series of, can you have a series? The tranches come in series, I don't know, slices, whatever tranches are. This is tranche 7, Connected Heritage. These were the things that they want it to do. So it's about communities of practice and pooling digital skills and expertise. So the funding, the groups that applied for got funding, this was their aim. And I'm kind of putting this up first of all because this is what evaluation looks like. So this is from the lottery's piece of work about what this tranche is supposed to deliver. And this is what success looks like for the National Lottery Heritage Fund in this tranche. Success will be measured in terms of the number of people, the inclusion of a wider range of people, organisations participate in activities, and the impact of these activities across and beyond the project. So that's the kind of the boxes that we need to tick, that the fundees need to tick. And I like it. You might all think, gosh, that's very boring and tick boxy, but it's actually very wide and very inclusive and there's a lot of room in it. And one thing that I want to highlight about evaluation is there's always quite a lot of room to go wrong in projects, and possibly more than you ever think. So wrong in inverted commas. And these are the lottery's 6 priority outcomes. So all lottery projects ought to tick some of these boxes. So I'm just putting this up here too, because a lot of projects that I've worked on, evaluation projects, have had a lot of these. So in the application, we've gone for a lot of these things that we're going to do. Maybe trim it down next time. I don't mean you particularly, but advice to everybody looking at a lottery project. And I think it's advice that you will get from the lottery as well, is, or maybe slim down, offer a little bit less. And if you do more, if you went for, you want a wider range of people and more resilience, and you ended up boosting the local economy, a good evaluator is going to pick that up, and it's going to get in your report, and it's going to go back to the lottery, and they're going to know. And these are the fundees who I have been making my way through over the last couple of months, talking to, and they're at different stages. And we've heard from four of them over the last couple of days. And I think you heard from the other in the last seminar. And they're lovely, all beautiful projects with beautiful outcomes. And because they've spoken, and because I don't want to speak for them, and because I don't have all the data yet, I don't want to go too deeply into them. And I'm sorry, I borrowed Career Kerno's lovely Outback zines, which, although they spoke yesterday, they didn't talk about these, this fabulous collection that was in the archive of Cress and Kerno, which is the big archives in Cornwall, but wasn't accessioned, and that's part of what they did, is accession that, so that now is digitally searchable with an LGBTQ plus search term to find it. And these were zines from groups of lesbians in Penzance, from, or West Cornwall, from the 80s to the noughties. That's what I've got to fill in. So that's the tick boxy bit, and I've cut the numbers because they're not current, so I don't want to just kind of put them on record right now. So, you know, I'm going through all the things that each project did and trying to work out all of these numbers, unique views for your website, for this bit of digital thing that you did and this bit of digital thing. So that's the really fascinating and totally unqueer side of evaluation, and you'll be pleased to know that that's over now. So I've never thought I'd become passionate about evaluation, but I have become quite passionate about it. And I think it can be really sexy. It can be a place of sexy excess. I'm saying it. I'm also trying to make this presentation really interesting when it's about evaluation and very dry. So what is evaluation? Whatever you want it to be. It is a report to the funding organisation. No getting away from it, that's what it is. It's giving them the numbers that they need to put into their mega computer in their back cave. But it is also, and to me, it mostly is a collaborative process with the commissioning organisation, the partner organisations, and the communities working with those partner organisations, and the individuals in the communities or outside the communities. So I have colleagues, and we spend a lot of time, and whoever else your evaluators are, talking to people and being present with those people, and not being you as the commissioning organisation or the partner organisation. So I'm neither QHCN nor am I Career Kerno. So I'm putting that out there because we're going to come back to it. In the beginning of your project is the ideal place to start thinking about evaluation, and maybe even getting it going with the first question, why? Why are you evaluating? Because you need the facts and figures for your funders. But what else can be gleaned, and what else do you need? So that's a chance for you to sit down with your colleagues, but also your evaluator to work out what can be got that you want. Is it proof of something, that we're getting a load of people that we want, but we're not getting another load of people that we do also want? Is it a deeper understanding of why people are coming, why people are taking part? Or is it that you think maybe I've only got this look, this look, my look, and I need someone to fact check me, just give me a nod that I'm right or I'm wrong, or somewhere in between as usual. And what's important to know, because there's a lot of data and you can't have everything, but you can have a lot. So do you want to know how many people are coming in the door? Do you want to know how many of a certain kind of people are coming in the door? Do you want to know how many, you know, there's a lot of how many's, and then there's a lot of whys. So it's really kind of honing in on what do you need to know. And a lot of that will be, what do you want to take forward again? If you're applying for another round of funding, what's the critical stuff that you want to know? And where do you want to be at the end of it? So we can do you a theory of change or some such fabulous tool that may be really out of date in a few years, but we'll get you from a point that you're at now and take you through to a point at the end that you want your funding to achieve. And then, are we all on the same page? So this is where it's really nice to start too, because of course we're all on the same page, we're all here, and then you realize halfway through your project, you're really not on the same page as some people that you really thought you were on the same page. And this might especially be if you're an organization working with an institution. So I don't want to pick on any of the ones that I've been working with because it's not necessarily true, but if you're a community organization and you're partnered with a bigger a museum, you're having a great time setting up the project, and then halfway through something happens and you realize your values were just not the same. And I was going to do a little exercise with you on this because we use a values check-in. We use structured ethical reflection, which is a thing invented by Mary Bryden Miller. And if you want to play it too, just Google her and you'll find it. But for example, I don't believe in authenticity. Anybody here believe in authenticity? Wait, maybe we all share values, or maybe I was too quick to say I didn't believe, and you don't feel you're able to, but these are all things, right? Maybe I've silenced you in the room. I prioritize fun over rigor. Some of you might prioritize rigor over fun. So it's this kind of, we can sit in a room and then we can get to a point where we know where other people are, know where we want to be, and where we can meet. Because although I prioritize fun over rigor, I'm really very rigorous. And I can dial it down. So it's just a kind of who's where, and are we in the same place? And it's not about being wary, but it is about being just aware, not wary, but aware. I've got loads of notes that I'm not reading, and that means I'll be totally lost when it comes to it. And then this is the big one for me, which I've already hinted at, I think. What's worse than over-promising and under-delivering? Over-promising and delivering on time and on target. And I think I don't think I've worked on a project that hasn't been a thing. So pull back on the over-promising and don't worry too much about under-delivering. And then we're in the project, and could your evaluator be more queer? So I think I'm not really putting this, I'm not the queerest of the queer to some extent, and I'm not saying that if you're doing a queer project, it needs a queer evaluator, but I think to some extent, there is something about the embodied experience that we've talked about positionality and about being comfortable. If there's a lot of kind of different talking to people, talking to different sides, and we're always a little bit more wary if we think somebody's not coming from the same place as we are. So it's not, I don't think it's necessary to be queer to do queer evaluation, but I think it's something that you want if you're doing a queer project, not necessarily a queer person, but to make sure that your evaluator knows that things are going to be a bit different. What's going to be different? Everything's going to be different. So I've just put this up. These are a bunch of projects that I've worked with, and I think they're all in the past, possibly one is not. So I think what's different and what do I think of as queering the evaluation process? I think it's really nice if you're queer to be working with other queer people. So I think that's a really simple position personally for me, but I think there's an added extra for all evaluation, not just queer evaluation, is get the most out of your evaluator. You're paying them and they're taking part in the process of your project, so you can use them for a lot more than you think maybe. Or the other thing I think is you often double up on work. So if you're doing survey work and feedback work, have a word with your evaluator, because maybe that's something that they could do for you. And if that is something that they can do for you, but is different from what you're needing, they can incorporate it. If it's something different from what the institution currently carries, they can add an extra layer. There are just lots of ways of that. And it's not just the survey work, it's if you're holding an event, your evaluator can come and be an extra pair of hands, whether that's talking to people and doing the survey work, or this is a project I've been working on in Cornwall with an artist who I spent a lot of time complaining that they don't pay me to help put up the tables. But actually, they do pay me to help put up the tables. It was a part of being present in that evaluation process, because a lot of what we do is participant work. A lot of my practice of evaluation is being there and doing the work with you, with the community, because I think that's a really good way of seeing how well a project is working. It's being at the event, and it's you know, a really simple and long-term process of participant observation. And I will do pie charts, but my pie charts can be quite different, because I understand that there's a real range of queerness. So if we are trying to get down to the nitty-gritty of who's here, we can do that, and certainly if the institution doesn't do it. And I think one thing that we are not as queer practitioners is necessarily objective. So I think that's quite a strong statement. I don't prioritize objectivity because I don't believe in it. We're going into museums that collect certain things in certain ways, that do statistics that we know, because we've all got silly, foolishly educated backgrounds where we understand that statistics can lie. So it's about redressing that. So what is queer evaluation when we're doing qualitative assessment? It's making sure that we are seeing things, even if they're marginal things, making sure that we're reporting on things, even if they're marginal things, signing out because we're signed in on another device. So I think there's just lots of looking at data in different ways when we're talking about qualitative work, quantitative work, and being very present for qualitative work. And I think another thing that we can do for that evaluators do is can be a critical friend throughout the project. So being someone that you can check in with, that can tell you honestly where you're standing, what your relationships might be doing, if they're going somewhere that you didn't think they would go. And also saying, don't worry, you've hit a really troubling patch, but it's not on you to sort it out, just keep going. And to normalize things. So I think one of the things that we have been useful to organizations while doing is to say, yes, you've hit something with a bigger institution than you, and they're trying to make you think this isn't okay, or it isn't something that we do. But we're there, and we can come to any number of meetings with you and say, this is something that you should do, and it is something that other places do, so why don't you do it? And, you know, whatever. And I think, you know, obviously we can't do magic and change trustees' behavior, but we can provide evidence from a lot of other projects to that extent. And I think, you know, there's something queer about being there and being performatively queer, being out there, being seen, and that's going to give you a degree of trust. You're going to trust the evaluation more. The people that we're getting data from are going to trust us more. And I think it's about prizing allyship. So, you know, I represent a certain kind of queerness, but I really committed to all the other kinds of queerness. So just making sure that we're doing the right thing, being there for the right people, and making sure that's going into the evaluation. Yeah, so biases, data collection, done that. And friction, I mean, I'll just go back to that because I think friction is inevitable. And I think we can help you get through it in a way. We can help organizations get through it. And one of the things that causes friction is when you start slipping and everybody's getting tetchy and something's not been done and who's supposed to do it anyway. And I think that's one of the big lessons to be learnt, which we're going to go into now. Lessons learned. These are generic, right? It's not just about you. But again, almost all projects I've worked with. And they're not just, some of them are really positive things. So you overpromised and delivered again. Are you okay? Because I think it's really draining, and queer people do it a lot because we believe in what we're doing, work really hard on something, get exhausted and go again. So it's important to kind of take a break. And I think it's another place that you can use a critical friend maybe, is to sort of tell you to pull back. And it doesn't matter if that part of your project goes, because where is it? Okay, so project planning and target setting are key. Like, the earlier you do that, better. But your project will change, and that's okay, because I've never met a project that didn't change, but still hit all those buttons, that still went back to, if you remember that, what does success look like? Yeah, even if you got 100 less people than you thought through the door, you still widened your communication or whatever it was. You're always going to hit those things that you said you'd hit, because you know you're doing it, because you know it's a good project, but you might have completely changed. But you're still hitting those really nicely worded, wide funders' outcomes. Brokers and champions, whether that's, I will say that these funded projects have used John Slade for that, and everybody said how wonderful it was to be able to talk, not just John, but to talk to people, and the word mentors come up. Aren't you, Dan? So people are really appreciating having that extra person in there to talk. And then it's, as an organization, maybe there's someone that can do it for you. Possibly not me, but might be someone, you know, you can also use the lottery for this. They've got a lot of people who can do a lot of help. Stay with the trouble. I think, especially in museums, hit a lot of really troubling bits where the people are really stuck in how museums do things, because it's how we do them. And as an example I'll use is that museums really know how many words you should put on a plaque. They really know it. So if you're working with a community, and a community member who knows what it is to be in a community, who's doing the work with the museum, says, but I want more words than that, the museum will say you can't, because that's not how we do it. So what? Just do it. I mean, push back at that. Use anybody you can, and use your evaluator for that, to just say, I'm sorry you're upset about it, but it's our project and that's what we're going to do. If it's sticky, you can point to it, but you don't have to clean it up. That's for them to clean up, and they'll be miffed, and they'll say, I never want to work with them again. And then they'll realize what a great exhibition it is. And oh God, it doesn't matter if there are 20 more words on a plaque. And that is what happens in my experience. But it is always a really weird one. I'm on my third evaluation where that's really upset people, is the number of words on the plaque. And then I think just another one that keeps coming up is co-creation isn't the same as a flat structure. You're working with a community, and you'll hit a point when they want to do it this way, and you might have to kind of, yeah, but I'm running the project, and that's all right. Co-creation isn't the same as a flat structure, and you can work through that. And there are lots of ways that you can workshop that, going back to those values exercises, and you can use other people to help you through it, whether that's a mediator or your friendly evaluator. Allocation and budget, I mean, of course, and I don't know how to, I don't think there's anything to be done about it, but you can never do all the things you want to do on the money, but it's important to try and budget for yourself. So if you're putting in the funding application, make sure you've got enough days for you. And if you haven't, try and hide it under somebody else's budget and not tell them. And also that allocation for community workers, if you want them to do it, that they can be rewarded if that's something that they want. A lot of people just want to do the volunteering and they don't need an Amazon voucher or whatever. And then the network, this is just because this is a beautiful network, and that's always valued, not just in projects that aren't, but that are about networks, but in projects that aren't. All projects bring people together, and that's such a strong thing to do, especially in the queer world. But what this network has done, and I think with these grantees, and that's a really big thing, is to push it out and move it around to different organizations that maybe you don't know where they are. So brilliant, find someone who does and push it out to them. And then they are in. And it's about that. It's all about being queer together. And I think that's it. Oh no, by the end of it, you should have clarity. You should know everything. You should, you should know what's gone really well and what hasn't. And you should be able to take that forward. You have a report for your funder, and it tells you something that you want to know too. And you've got, you know, something that you didn't know before, or you've got proof for something that you didn't have before. And you should have had a gay old time with me or your other queer evaluators, and put the gay back into engaged.
Thank you so much, Sefryn, for the presentation. I think we have a few minutes for questions.
I'm very surprised if anyone's got a question about evaluation.
Yeah, people in the room or online. Not yet. Yeah.
You sort of used it as a
When
throw.
do you want your report?
Yeah, when can I have the report, please? Thank you. No, it's you sort of said it in passing, and I just want to latch onto it as what does queer evaluation look like? I know you said, you know.
I think it looks like much more of the middle, much more of being in the mess than so. I mean, I think setting it up is great, and in a sense, you always know at the beginning what you want to do, and at the end, you're going to get a report. That I think the queerness comes in the middle, and it's about not messing up the data, it's doing the data differently. So it is looking at those attendance figures and how many people are white women between the ages of 25 and 30. It doesn't really tell you anything. It might tell funder what they need to know, or an institution. But it's much more about getting into the detail with people, I think, and just being with you in the project, taking part in it. Can I just look at my notes?
Yeah, of course. I mean, a follow-up question for me would be, so some of the transparencies, we've brought you on in the last few months. So you're coming to us at sort of the tail end of this particular project.
Yeah, this is a total subtweet.
Yeah. And if you were here with us sort of 2 years ago, what would you have done differently with us? Like, what do you think you would have begun the journey with us with?
I think with you, I think we would have, the starting point would have been really trying to get at what you wanted for yourself as much as for your fundees. To be honest, I think that what you've got for yourself and from your fundees is what you want. So, you know, I will be sending a lovely report back to the lottery that says how great you are. But I think the second point for me is I think what we could have done for them. So I think, you know, we can't go to every event they do, but I think there's something about being there and just being another pair of hands for the fundees to do that work that wouldn't have been on their budget because it would have been on what you have budgeted for the evaluation. And just helping guide that through a bit where they needed it, being another, and they did have critical friends, but we would have been independent in a way. So I think there's that might have been something that you could have got from us. The other thing is a boring thing, which isn't very queer, is I think we would have put in the measuring mechanisms for that data that I know you didn't get until like a year into the project, but just that, how are you collecting, what are you collecting? And I think there is a queerness in what are you collecting? Because the other thing is the lottery does have that spreadsheet, but there's a lot of other things we can send back to them that's qualitative, and that's interview stuff and survey stuff. And we did quite a lot of informal, semi-formal chats with people at events. So the other thing that we like being at events for is to get that real gritty. What's it like being here? What's it doing for you? While people are really in that exuberant mode and wanting to feedback. I think the other queering thing is, I know that we've talked a lot about pushback, is having another group there that's independent, but still queer. So I think that's, you never have to think that there's another entity around that's potentially difficult or might be troublesome. Sorry, I've got a little bit of COVID brain, can only keep a few things in at a time. I talked about objectivity. So I think there's a kind of just, there's an objective way forward in heritage work, isn't there? This is how it's done. But I think querying it does take it on a slightly different path. So I think on some of those projects that we've done before, oh no, so it's not on there anymore, is it? Oh. Thank you. This was the evaluation station that we had for the Beyond the Binary exhibition at Hit Rivers. This was our feedback wall, which by the end of the project was a hot mess. There was an ability to kind of clean it and let it be and record it and put on again. But that kind of an unleashing of an informal feedback was really, really nice. And people, we encouraged them to kind of write on the toilet walls. Toilets are a sort of still now source of, trouble, whatever. But it was kind of freeing in a way, and then people would kind of go back into the thing, having scribbled on the wall and felt like they had much more of a connection with the exhibition. And we had quite a lot of good feedback. The wall of joy. The wall of joy is good to see. But I think it was also, it was similar to Whitworth. We had very little anti-trans stuff, but just occasionally, I think there were like 2. So we just, bleach it off, record it for the sake of the archive, but it was very little. So it was that kind of actual, really positive feedback from a lot of people in the museum, where to some extent, not from the director could not have been more supportive of the project, but for some people, slightly like, oh, are people going to think it's too whatever? When like they didn't. I mean, partly because if you were going to go to that exhibition, you wouldn't, but also because the exhibition did an amazing job with its quite big plaques of expressing what different queer identities were, and for presencing things that people didn't necessarily know. But yeah, and then I think another thing that we do is a lot of kind of workshopping. So that values thing that I briefly talked about, we do quite a lot of that kind of thing, which again is something that you probably do, or organisations can do themselves, but it's also something that we can do quite quickly. You don't need to labour it, just give us 2 hours and we can do that kind of workshop, and then it's again something that you don't need to worry about. So a lot of it is just taking stuff off your hands, because you're paying us anyway. I don't know if that really answers your question. I'm not sure I've hammered it down. I'm really thinking through it, because I'm ending up doing more peer evaluation and I love it. And I know it's different. And I think part of it is being of the group that's doing it. And then just the way we are when we're with our own, as opposed to strutting around this exhibition about the Bronze Age or whatever.
I think that's such a great demonstration. Sorry, I'll come to you. I mean, this is such a great demonstration because my brain still put the word "not" in "please do not write on the walls." Like, did that happen to anyone else? Like, my brain just went, "Please do not write on the walls." It's like, and people wrote on the walls, and only as you came back to it, now I go, "Oh my gosh, the word "not" isn't even there." And that, as an evaluation, that is a great example of queer evaluation, isn't it? It's just to do the direct opposite of what we're conditioned to do. And in doing that, you kind of end up with a, what did you call it? A hot mess of evaluation. I love it.
A sexy excess. Another thing we did for that project, but they ended up doing for themselves, was a kind of map through the museum where we just picked objects that we thought were kind of queer, whether it said they were or not. I mean, we were very careful not to kind of put meanings on things from other places that we don't necessarily know about, but just the kind of, that sort of walking through a museum like that, and a thing that they don't have as a result of this exhibition. I believe they're going through the catalogue to be able to put queer search terms in. But again, something that people were really fiercely, well, how can you put queer search terms in? We can only search for potato peelers or whatever. So then they were asking, well, what would a queer potato peeler look like? And sometimes in that museum, you're like, that is a queer potato peeler. Peeler on one side, dildo on the other. Like, what else can it be? So there's a kind of, there's that kind of queer looking that we've all got, and you walk through that museum and you can't really believe that they don't believe that that's a sexy thing. So there's that. Anyway, we were going to do that map, but they ended up doing one themselves, which was super, and a lovely way that lots of museums are doing now. Yeah. And if you're lucky, you'll pose next to pretty men in their sexy outfits, formerly known as the Prince of Wales or whatever. Yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your questions. I think another thing is that sort of the non-binariness of something like that, which we're working on, kind of how do you stop a pie chart actually doing this and trying to kind of put more blurry edges between it, because everything we ask, I mean, this is another thing about the data collection, everything we ask is in these boxes, and that's how you do survey work. So what is queering survey? So there's quant qual, but is there a separation that we can kind of get to? And I think we get to that with more of the semi-formal interview work. And also we always have a kind of anonymous feedback, and I didn't put anything from our website, but we have a lot of surveys online and on postcards. We'll have physical postcards, but also postcards that you can post online to us and tell us things, which some people do. Sorry, I'll stop talking.
No, we've got a question online. So put it on screen. So
let's see sexy excess now.
So it's a question from Kaz. They say, thank you, this is really interesting. What do you think about allowing visitors to evaluate as they please and avoiding censoring their feedback through how we present our evaluations? For example, I saw at the Beyond the Binary show at the Rivers, before the end of the show, they cleaned off a whole bunch of evaluations written on the walls beyond the evaluation station. How can we challenge museums' impulses to clean up the sexy excess of such messy queer sites of feedback?
I think that's such a good question, and it ties into a much bigger question about embedding things, because a lot of these things are just short-term projects and then they move on. And just going back to a lot of these, the funded projects that are funded by Tranche 7, queer Tranche 7, a lot of them have been engaging with bigger institutions and asking them to think differently or helping them to think differently. And I know that you worked with Queer Kerno in the archives on how to do that. And actually, unusually, from what I've experienced, they're like, yeah, we'll have LGBTQ as a search term, why not? But that challenge of embedding things is huge, isn't it? And I think, as we've heard, you can embed it and then your director leaves and it's replaced by somebody who, it's not a big thing and they change it up. So I think that's a much bigger question than I can answer, certainly, but pressure. Now, I will say one thing about the formal evaluation for Beyond the Binary that did go to the museum and was seen, at high levels. In terms of things like people coming to the museum who have not been, so that hard to reach category that all museums, most museums want. That happened. So we were able to say, of the people that we stopped and of the people that filled in the surveys, 50% of them have come to that museum for the first time, and some of them the first time they've been in a museum. And these are people in Oxford, city of museums. So that was big, and that's data. So in terms of giving a museum a kick to say, oh, okay. I mean, I know they cleaned up the wall and that exhibition isn't permanent, but it does kind of lend a, you know, it's a footstep forward, isn't it? The exhibition is 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but at least there's a little toe forward. But it's a great question and a huge one.